And topping the Eyewitness News update this Monday night, the talks continue, but a major stumbling block has come up in the tentative contract settlement reached between striking nurses and Twin Cities hospitals. The woman most frequently mentioned as a vice presidential running mate for Walter Mondale finally came to North Oaks for her interview today. A child murder trial is about to get underway in St. Paul, but last-minute legal moves are trying to get key evidence thrown out. And On Your Behalf goes after a company that's failed to live up to its end of a home remodeling deal. The full report coming up next on The Update.
612-944-9780. Now, Cindy Brigato, Stan Turner, Dennis Felkin, and Bob Bruce. This is the Eyewitness News Update.
Good evening, everyone. Cindy's on vacation this week. In the news tonight, Twin Cities nurses say that a major obstacle has come in the way of a tentative contract settlement. The nurses' union is accusing hospital negotiators of trying to sabotage the tentative contract agreement reached just this past weekend. The major glitch seems to be or it centers on the return to work issue, as Frank Mann reports.
Negotiations broke off at 6 p.m. after the nurses held a brief press conference. There, they condemned the hospitals for the way the back-to-work agreement was being handled.
We can't even get a back-to-work settlement that's consistent with what we spent a week on agreeing to begin with. The hospitals are not willing at this point to even abide by the contract language for which just a day or so ago they said was okay.
According to the nurses, the hospitals want to recall nurses in a manner totally inconsistent with the agreement. The nurses say the hospitals are demanding that all scabs be allowed to stay on regardless of their seniority.
And statements like that are going to do nothing except to bog down this process and delay any agreement we can ever come to.
Calling their accusations totally false, a spokesman for the hospital says these kinds of inflammatory remarks could jeopardize the talks.
We're trying to do our best to get people back to work as quickly as possible and in as fair a way as possible, and that's what we're trying to do.
Though the nurses are calling this new development a major obstacle, it apparently hasn't yet soured the whole process. Both sides say they'll meet again tomorrow in the morning. Frank Mann, Channel 5 Eyewitness News, Minneapolis.
And during the nurses' strike, hospitals were forced to practice a more efficient, less expensive brand of medicine. And experts are predicting that that new kind of health care will continue long after the nurses' strike is over. Our medical specialist, Dr. Michael Breen, tells us more.
At first, it sounded like a catastrophe. 6,000 nurses, the heart of our hospital system, on strike. But from the start, hospitals and doctors adapted. Surgeons did more same-day surgery, which required fewer nurses. New mothers were sent home early, sometimes only 24 hours after a delivery. Other patients were also discharged earlier to open up hospital beds. Experts say, as a result, hospitals were able to provide adequate care despite the loss of 6,000 nurses.
It does indicate how much fat there was in the system, and if you want to provide appropriate care at less cost, you can do it far more conservatively, with far fewer services, without jeopardizing quality.
Many of the changes produced by the strike will be permanent. Methodist Hospital, for instance, will continue doing heart vessel studies as same-day procedures. That procedure once required 2 nights in the hospital. Dr. George Tangen says the strike has stretched the hospital system to the breaking point, but he says it's also taught the medical profession a lesson.
I think new things have been learned about how to take care of people. I think our hospitals probably will have fewer patients.
The nurses' strike began because nurses didn't want to be singled out to pay the price for a leaner, more efficient healthcare system. Ironically, the strike itself has accelerated that shift to a more efficient system. And as a result, the hospitals involved are likely to need less nurses than ever in the future. This is Dr. Michael Breen, Channel 5 Eyewitness News.
Well, some high-level jockeying for a position today between the Soviet Union and the United States. The Russians have called on the U.S. to meet in Geneva this fall to talk about banning space weapons. The U.S. says, yes, it will talk about that, but it also wants to discuss the nuclear arms issue. The Soviets say no. In Moscow, Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko says the U.S. does not want talks on banning space weapons, although it pretends it does. Gromyko says the discussion of space weapons and nuclear arms at the Geneva meeting is unacceptable. At the White House, meanwhile, President Reagan says he wants the talks to go on in September, and he stands by what the U.S. proposed to the Soviets this weekend. And Jesse Jackson is also planning to do some talking with the Soviets. The Democratic presidential hopeful says that he will travel to the Soviet Union this year to possibly seek the release release of Soviet dissident Andrei Sakharov. Jackson also plans to seek a visa for a trip to racially segregated South Africa. Some other political notes tonight. For the first time in history, a majority of delegates to the Democratic National Convention expressed interest in a woman as the party's vice presidential candidate. And according to an Associated Press survey, the favorite of the delegates is New York Congresswoman Geraldine Ferraro. Ferraro was in Minnesota today talking to Fritz Mondale about the #2 spot. Our government specialist Lindsay Strand reports.
Right by that X there.
Congresswoman Ferraro is the second woman to be interviewed for the job and the woman most often mentioned as the top choice of many. Her visit to North Oaks comes at a time of growing pressure on Mondale to name a woman as a running mate. The National Organization for Women says it will put a woman's name in nomination at the convention if Mondale does not. And today, Lieutenant Governor Marlene Johnson would not rule out working for a challenger if a woman is not Mondale's choice.
Women of America are prepared to say the life experience and language of our own lives is an important part of leadership in the country, and that we want it at that high level of government.
Johnson supports a female running mate in part for its symbolism, the kind of symbolism that was evident today. Ferraro brought her husband to town for the visit, but he went shopping for artwork with Joan Mondale while the actual interview took place. After a 3.5-hour meeting, Ferraro said she would very much like the job, but would not allow a convention draft if Mondale settles on a man.
Quite frankly, the most important thing for me is to win in November, and that means beating Ronald Reagan. It should be the most important thing for the women of this country as well.
Mondale acknowledged the pressure to pick a woman.
Dealing with pressure is basically what a public leader does, but it is not going to change my commitment to pick the best possible person. That's exactly what I'm going to do, and I made that clear to everyone.
Mondale says the pressure to pick a woman is about what he expected, pressure that will grow on Wednesday when he meets with 20 women, including Lieutenant Governor Marlene Johnson. Lindsay Strand, Channel 5 Eyewitness News.
Earlier today, Walter Mondale spoke at the National Education Association convention in Minneapolis. More than 7,000 teachers heard Mondale ask for a return to the basics in the classroom and more parental involvement at home. The NEA is one of Mondale's largest support groups. In fact, many of the educators are delegates pledged to support him at the Democratic Convention in San Francisco later this month. That Mondale speech was, of course, the big news coming from the NEA convention today, but the delegates also discussed their own task force report on educational excellence. Among other things, the report calls for more teacher evaluations and eventually for children to start school at a younger age. But the educators actually spent little time talking about that report today. The heavy debate will begin tomorrow. We still have much more ahead here tonight on the update, including some last-second legal maneuvering underway in St. Paul in a child murder trial. And Neil Murray goes to work for a Lakeville couple on your behalf, so please stay with us. Samuel Thomas has pleaded not guilty to one of the most brutal crimes in recent St. Paul history. Thomas is charged with attacking 2 St. Paul children at a Hague Avenue home last winter. 10-year-old Ricardo Churcher died in that attack. 8-year-old Sojourner McLean was critically injured. Now, the key evidence against Thomas came from young Sojourner McLean. From her hospital bed, she twice identified him as her assailant. Well, today, in a pretrial hearing, defense attorneys indicated they will try to get that identification thrown out as evidence. Kevin Berger has more.
When prosecutors charged Sam L. Thomas last winter, they said they were convinced he was their man. The critical evidence came from the 8-year-old girl injured in the attack.
I think from the standpoint of identifying who did it, she's certainly been consistent in every way.
But today, attorneys for Thomas said Sojourner McLean was in no physical or mental shape to identify any suspect. St. Paul homicide detective Gregory Pye was one of the officers she made the identification to. Today, he testified the girl picked Thomas from a group of pictures, and the picture of Thomas was the first photo she was shown.
One of the mistakes that was made was to take a photograph and show it to a person when they were within, not that many hours after a tremendously traumatic situation, and hold up one photograph to them. That, we think, leads to a significant probability of misidentification.
Attorneys for Sam L. Thomas want the girl's identification to be inadmissible as evidence in the trial. They also believe police stopped looking for other suspects as soon as Thomas was identified by the victim.
There's no doubt that they did that. In fact, they discarded all of their leads. they had some other strong leads. They just stopped.
Later in the week, attorneys for Sam L. Thomas will ask for a change of venue. They say they want the trial to be held in Duluth. They maintain Thomas cannot get a fair trial in the Twin Cities because of news accounts. Jury selection is expected to begin at the end of this week or the beginning of next. Kevin Berger, Channel 5 Eyewitness News, St. Paul.
The Minneapolis City Council now has 3 pornography ordinances to deal with this month. Passed in committee today were 2 ordinances dealing with violent pornography and with the use of opaque covers on books and magazines. Ironically, those who oppose these new ordinances are against pornography. They would rather see it banned rather than controlled.
Women's bodies are dirty. Sex is dirty. That whole notion is what underlies obscenity law. These ordinances re-eroticize the pornography. They make it back into a dirty secret.
Well, another ordinance discussed several weeks ago allows women to object to pornography if they feel it violates their civil rights. That ordinance, along with the other 2 passed today, will go before the council on July the 13th. 20 years ago to the day since President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law, an emotional race issue has surfaced at Minneapolis City Hall. Members of the minority community are angry that Mayor Fraser wants to appoint a white woman to direct the city's civil rights office. Many speakers at a public hearing today said no matter what her qualifications, she can't begin to understand their problems because of the color of her skin.
Hell no, it will never be. It can't be. Represent women's rights, not people of color's rights. You don't experience what we experience. You don't live what we live, and you don't die the way we die. We come in poor and we go out poor. We come in with no rights and we go out with no rights. She come in white, and she shares in your society, and she'll go out white, sharing in your society.
The council committee voted to send the nomination to the full council without recommendation.
I hear
Nixon
you,
would
and I
become
hear a
the
lot of
first.
truth in what you're saying. Just because I'm white doesn't mean I can't see and don't know what goes on. But I applied for this position in good faith. It's been some 10 weeks of my life. I still want it.
As you heard her say, she still wants the job. The council committee voted to send that nomination to the full council without recommendation. As we say, Hickson would in fact become the first white and the first woman to hold the civil rights director's job in Minneapolis if she is ultimately approved. Civil rights was very much on the minds of the 4,000 delegates who opened the 75th session of the annual NAACP convention in Kansas City. All 3 presidential candidates will make appearances there this week. The organization says it will pay special attention to both political parties to make sure the issues important to the black community are addressed. Despite some advances, Executive Director Benjamin Hook said today that this nation is still building 2 separate but unequal societies. Well, with home mortgage rates on the rise once again, many homeowners are choosing to stay put and simply make home improvements on their existing houses. But a remodeling project is not necessarily so simple, as one Lakeville couple recently found out. In fact, they contacted Neil Murray and our On Your Behalf unit for a helping hand.
George Patterson decided to have his home completely renovated last year. The Pattersons signed a contract with Father and Son Construction Company last November 17th. At the time, the Pattersons also allowed Father and Son to arrange the financing through Norwest Bank. Construction was then to be completed in less than a month, back in January, but they're still waiting.
Father and Son promised that they'd get right on it, get the project finished, and they just kept picking away at it. The quality of the workmanship was extremely bad, and the time span is slow and slow and slow.
So On Your Behalf went to Father and Son offices in South Minneapolis last week to find out why the delays.
Without question, we have had some problems with it. Some due to contracting, you know, where you get a crew out there and weather isn't good enough for them to work. It's a farmhouse with no heat.
When will the project be completed?
Project will be completed in 1 week.
I'll believe it when I see it.
To make matters worse, George Patterson signed a document last October 18th that he thought would give him clout over Father and Son during the entire remodeling project. It did not.
What did you think this was going to accomplish? What they had written in here, that the funds would be released to me, that they would receive 50% for the materials on starting, 50%, 25% on rough-in, and the other 25% when they were finished with the project, and gave me lien waivers.
But this says, 1, Father and Son shall receive 100% of the contract price.
And in turn shall give it to me.
50% to you.
Right. This paper was supposed to go to the bank so they would know what was happening.
That never happened. Father and son took all of the $42,690 they received from Norwest Bank.
During that period of time, this still had not gone to Norwest Bank. Why?
Oversight.
In addition to this $42,690 oversight, we learned of another problem. It involves Norwest Bank and one of their forms that Mr. Patterson had to sign. It raises many questions. I'm Neil Murray on your behalf.
And Neil will attempt to get the answers to some of those questions as to the way the original contract was set up with father and son. That tomorrow night on the Eyewitness News Update at 10 o'clock. Still ahead here tonight on this update, Dave Dahl has all the hot weather information for the next couple of days. And we're going to show you one guy who wants the world to know he was the last to do it. There we go.
Tuesday night at 11 on Channel 5.
Okay, here we go with a story about a stunt that hasn't been done successfully in 23 years. This morning, a 37-year-old daredevil went over Niagara Falls and survived. The Ontario resident climbed into a barrel and launched himself into the river just above the falls, made the 3-second stunt at the rate of 75 miles per hour and came out with only a few injuries. The professional stuntman has been working on this jump, preparing for it for 8 years. 8 people, by the way, have tried the stunt. 5 have survived. Well, well, David Dahl, surviving the humidity. That's kind of our order of the day, isn't it? It's really sticky out there tonight.
Yeah, and it just usually lends to severe weather. And there has been a little bit up north in Otter Tail County. That's 60-mile-an-hour winds and 3/4-inch hail. But right now, no severe weather warnings out at all. But there is still the risk of severe weather over most of Minnesota. This is what it looks like right now. There's a slight risk of severe thunderstorms continuing over most of the upper Midwest. And thanks to heat, we've had a lot of heat showing up midsection of the country, 90s pouring all the way up into south-central South Dakota. And that's slightly above normal for this time of the year with the 80s over most of Minnesota. The 70s showing up there in the northern part of the state all the way up through central Canada.
I'll tell you, the Twins call them giant killers. The Tigers, and now this.
I think these guys are serious.
I think
no
so.
kidding. I don't know what it is, but there's something about the world champion Baltimore Orioles that brings out the best. 0.743 miles per hour in qualifying today, and that would be a slow speed out on I-94, but you know, it was good for the Firecracker 400.
Slow indeed. Can't believe McEnroe keeping his mouth shut, Bob.
Yeah, I tell you, I think he's serious this year.
Today's sports miracle. Okay, finally tonight, a birthday cake that many people thought would never be lit was presented to a very special little boy today. Jimmy Tontlevitz, the little Chicago boy you might recall, was lifted lifeless from Icy Lake, Michigan in February, was given a birthday celebration in New York today, although his birthday isn't until Thursday. Jimmy was under the water for 20 minutes before his rescue. Many doubted that he would pull through, but as you can see, his taste for birthday cake is very much alive. The young man is healthy. He's with us. Nice indeed. And on that nice note, we bid you good night. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow night. Good night.
The Eyewitness News Update is Minnesota's most watched newscast.